Operation. Alpha King orders in an ancient language to humiliate the waitress. Little did he know she was the secret moon that. The great hall of King Kale's castle shimmered under the glow of 1,000 torches. High ceilings carved from black stone arched like the ribs of a sleeping dragon. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting battles long past, dragons coiled around swords, and queens with eyes that seemed to follow the unwary. Tonight, the hall was alive with music, laughter, and the clinking of crystal goblets. Courtiers in jewel-toned robes whispered in corners, glancing nervously at one another, as if secrets lurked behind every smile.
In the midst of this grandeur moved Lyra. She was a simple waitress, unknown and overlooked, carrying trays of wine and plates of roast venison.
Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands escaping to frame a pale, serene face. Her hands moved carefully, balanced, yet there was an alertness in her eyes, as if she could see through the veil of gilded masks to the truth beneath. No one noticed her as she passed. They barely looked at her at all, except for one pair of eyes that burned brighter than the torchlight itself. King Kale, seated on his throne at the far end of the hall, watched her from the shadows. He was a man of iron and shadow, tall and broad-shouldered, with hair black as a raven's wing and eyes that could unsettle even the most confident of lords. A murmur ran through the court whenever he spoke, as if the walls themselves listened.
Kale had ruled for decades, and yet he remained restless.
He had power, wealth, and fear, but not fascination. Until now. Until Lyra moved among the lords and ladies, so small, so fragile, yet there was something in her step that hinted at a quiet defiance. He did not understand it, and that made him curious. The music faltered, the chatter paused, as Kale leaned forward. "Bring her here," he commanded in a voice smooth and dangerous. "Now." Breath stilled. Not out of fear, but because she had learned to read the air in the castle, and it was charged with something old, something powerful. She walked forward, head bowed, tray clutched to her chest. The hall grew silent, all eyes turning toward her. She could feel their gazes like arrows, but she did not falter. Kale raised his hand and the room seemed to shrink. "In the tongue of our forefathers," he said, and words flowed from him in a language older than the stones beneath their feet. It was harsh and commanding, rolling like thunder over the marble floor. Lyra froze, recognizing the meaning even if she had never spoken it aloud. "Bow, servant, and bear your shame before all who dare look upon you." Some gasped. Others leaned forward in morbid curiosity. They had seen many punished at Kale's whim, but none quite like this. Her hands did not tremble. Her hands did not tremble, Burrit. She lowered her head slightly, but there was no shame in it, only a calm that unsettled everyone, including the king. Kale's eyes loud. The obedience he demanded was there, yes, but it was not fear. Something else gleamed beneath her serenity. A spark of power he could not name. He motioned with his hand, expecting a full submission, a bow low enough to remind her of her place. Ira did not comply further. Instead, she spoke softly, her voice carrying a strange resonance, almost as if it belonged both to her and to the wind itself. "Power," she said, "is not only in fear, my lord. It is in the choice to act, even under it." A hush fell over the hall. Kale's lips twitched, half surprise, half irritation. Who dared speak back to him? His hand clenched, but something in the way she said it, the calm certainty, the quiet command, made his chest tighten in a way he had never expected. He was not used to feeling unsettled. The courtiers whispered, some fearful, some intrigued. Beration. They had never seen the king's stoic mask falter, but now it did, ever so slightly. And Cale did not know what frightened him more, the fact that she might be dangerous, or that he could not stop staring at her. Lyra curtsied then, as if acknowledging his presence without yielding to it. She backed away slowly, leaving the hall tense with unspoken questions. Beration. As she turned to leave, Cale's voice called her again, not in the ancient language this time, but in his own commanding tone. Wait. Cale rose from his throne, tall and imposing. He stepped down from the dais, every eye in the room following him. Bray. His gaze met hers, and in it she glimpsed something rare. Curiosity unmasked, vulnerability hidden in pride, and a challenge he did not yet understand. Beration. Tell me, he said quietly, close enough that only she could hear. What are you? Lyra's eyes flickered, and for a moment the faintest silver light shimmered around her hands. No one else noticed it.
And that light, a reflection of something celestial, stirred something deep within him, a fascination tinged with dread.
I am someone you do not yet understand, she replied.
Her voice was calm, but underneath it lay a river of power flowing strong and silent, and perhaps someone you should fear even if you do not know why. Kayla's jaw tightened, but his heart raced.
He had spent years commanding fear, bending men and women alike to his will. He had never felt fear, not real fear, nor real fascination. And yet, here it was, wrapped in a simple girl's quiet gaze. The banquet continued, but nothing felt the same. Conversation stumbled and faltered. Courtiers whispered about the moon waitress who had faced the king without flinching. Cale returned to his throne, but he could not concentrate on the feast, the music, or the laughter. All he could see was Lyra moving among them, serene, unafraid, and unknowable. Later, when the hall emptied, Lyra returned to the kitchens. The servants glanced at her nervously, sensing a change they could not name. The torchlight flickered across her face, highlighting the small curve of her lips and the faint glow in her eyes. She removed her tray and leaned against the wall, breathing in the cool night air that had filtered through the castle windows. Alone, she allowed herself a moment to feel the pull of her own secret. She was not just a servant. She was something older, something tied to the moon itself, a force of light in darkness, hidden until now. She had waited centuries, moving among mortals, learning, observing, hiding. And yet tonight, something had stirred. Someone had seen, or almost seen, her truth. Far above, in his private chambers, Cale could not sleep. He sat by the window, staring at the moon, silver and round in the night sky. The words she had spoken, the calm in her defiance, haunted him. Something in her had touched him, something that made him want to bend rules, to test boundaries, to know more than he had ever dared. And yet there was fear too, not of losing his throne or his crown, but of losing control. Of what might happen if he leaned too close to the light she carried. For Cale had ruled through fear, through certainty, and now he felt a force rising that neither fear nor strength could contain. Outside the castle, a shadow moved across the walls. Someone watched Lyra as she rested, unseen, yet aware. Their breath was quiet, reverent, and the whisper that slipped from their lips carried the weight of prophecy. The moon walks among men. Operation. The Alpha does not yet know the gravity of her light. Kyle, leaning over the balcony, felt a pull he could not explain. Barash, his mind raced with questions he had no answers to. His pride, his curiosity, and a strange, unnameable longing tugged at his heart. He had faced armies, witches, and treacherous kings, but none of them had unsettled him like this simple, enigmatic girl. Lyra turned her gaze to the sky, her fingers brushing against the cold stone of the castle wall. Brr. Moonlight touched her, illuminating her faint silver glow. For a moment she allowed herself to feel hope and fear together, intertwined like the twin threads of destiny. The night was quiet, but the world had shifted, and somewhere deep within the shadows of the castle, K.L. whispered her name, not as a command, but as a question he feared to answer. Lyra! Who are you? The wind carried a hint of magic, of promise, and of a storm yet to come. And so, the first seeds were sown. Two souls, bound by fate, one by power, one by secret light, now set on a collision course that would change the kingdom forever. The night held its breath. The morning after the banquet, the castle was alive with whispers. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones about the mysterious waitress who had faced King Kao without bowing completely, whose quiet defiance had left the king, usually unshakable, uneasy. Some called her reckless, others clever, but all sensed a change, subtle yet undeniable. Lyra moved among the castle kitchens, her hands washing pots and arranging trays, yet her mind was elsewhere. The night's encounter had stirred something deep inside her. She was used to hiding her true nature, her celestial light, her connection to the moon. But she felt a tremor in the air, as if destiny itself had begun to stir around her. Every shadow, every flicker of torchlight seemed to watch her. She had lived for centuries in quiet observation, but for the first time she sensed that someone had truly noticed her. Kale, meanwhile, had not stopped thinking of her. He had tried to immerse himself in the affairs of the kingdom. Audiences, disputes over land, reports of rebellion, but every word felt hollow.
His mind returned again and again to the calm defiance of the small, silver-eyed girl who dared speak in the shadow of his throne.
There was something about her that pulled at him, an invisible thread of intrigue and unease. By midday, Kale decided to summon her. The command went out, echoing through the stone halls like a hammer striking iron. The waitresses and servants exchanged anxious glances, but Lyra's face remained serene. She approached the throne room, her tray empty, hands folded before her as if she were preparing for judgment rather than serving wine. Kale was already seated, though the throne felt too large for the moment. He leaned forward slightly as if the vastness of the room was pressing in on him.
Come closer,
he said, his voice calm but edged with something dangerous.
Lyra stepped forward. She lowered her eyes but did not kneel fully. Her presence filled the hall in a quiet way that made the courtiers shift nervously.
I wish to understand, Kale continued, why you did not show fear last night.
Why you dared to speak, even in the tongue of our ancestors, in defiance of my command. Lyra's gaze lifted slowly, and she met his eyes.
There was no arrogance, no malice, only calm, measured truth. Because, my lord, fear is not the only way to survive. And strength is not always what it seems. Kale frowned. The words irritated him, yet they stirred something he had not felt in decades. Curiosity. His life had been ruled by certainty, strength, fear, control, but here was a girl who suggested that power could be something different, that perhaps there was another path.
Another path, he repeated, testing the phrase as if it were a foreign taste on his tongue. And what path is that? Lyra's lips curved slightly.
the one that does not bow to shadow but walks with it, the one that does not command through fear alone but chooses when to bend and when to stand. For a moment, Cale was silent. He wanted to challenge her, to assert his dominance, but something held him back. He could see it in her eyes. A light that was faint but undeniable, like moonlight seeping through cracks in a dark room. And it called to something buried deep inside him. The tension between them was almost unbearable. Neither spoke for several heartbeats, yet the conversation itself felt charged, as if the room were holding its breath. Then Cale leaned back and studied her quietly. Perhaps, he said slowly, I have underestimated you. Lyra inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the truth of his words without submission.
The moment stretched, filled with unspoken questions, unspoken understanding, and a strange, undeniable attraction.
But there were eyes, watching. Shadows flitted across the corridors, and unseen courtiers whispered of strange happenings in the castle. Rumors of rebellion and betrayal mixed with whispers of magic and prophecy. Lyra, for her part, remained cautious. She could sense the stirrings of fate, the way the threads of power were pulling tighter around her and Cale. Her secret, the light of the moon she carried within her, was dangerous. If revealed too soon, it could draw enemies from every corner of the kingdom, and perhaps beyond. The days passed in a tense rhythm.
Cale found excuses to summon her, under the guise of testing her abilities or seeking her opinion on small matters. Each meeting was a dance of wills. He tested her patience, she tested his restraint.
The courtiers noticed the subtle shift in their dynamic. How the king, usually distant and untouchable, seemed unsettled in her presence.
Some murmured that she had bewitched him. Others wondered if she was part of a prophecy long hidden in the archives of the kingdom.
One evening, Cale summoned her to the moonlit gardens, a place few dared to walk at night. Silver light poured over the marble fountains and sculpted hedges, casting long, twisting shadows. The air was cool, filled with the scent of night-blooming flowers and the distant echo of water trickling over stone.
Why do you always follow the rules, Lyra? Cale asked quietly, pacing near the fountain.
Why do you appear so obedient, yet speak in riddles that unsettle me? Lyra stepped lightly on the cobblestones, her reflection flickering in the water. Because the world rewards obedience, my lord.
But strength. Strength lies in knowing when to bend and when to rise.
Cale stopped, his eyes narrowing. And yet you bend to no one.
Not even me.
A faint smile touched her lips. I bend only when it serves a purpose greater than pride. For a moment they simply watched each other, the space between them filled with tension neither could name. Cale felt his heart pound, a strange mixture of admiration and frustration. He had ruled this kingdom with iron, yet here was someone who challenged him with mere words and presence. Lyra glanced upward at the moon, now high in the sky. Its pale light touched her face and hands, causing a subtle shimmer to dance across her skin. Cale noticed it immediately, though he did not understand what it meant. A quiet hum of power seemed to radiate from her, invisible but undeniable. The moon, Cale whispered, almost to himself. It moves strangely tonight. Lyra's eyes met his, and she did not speak. The truth lingered unspoken. She was not merely mortal, not merely a servant. She carried a power that had slumbered for centuries, tied to the cycles of the moon, a force that could shift the balance of the kingdom itself. Cale's pride stirred, but so did a strange desire, not the desire of possession, but of understanding. He wanted to see her fully, to know her strength and her secret. And yet fear whispered at the edges of his mind. This power was not something to command. It was something to respect, perhaps even to fear. The garden grew silent, the sounds of the castle fading into the night. Lyra took a careful step backward. "My lord,"
You test boundaries too far, she said softly, her voice carrying authority and calm in equal measure.
Power is not always in command. Sometimes it is in restraint.
Kale's jaw tightened, and he took a step closer, his shadow falling over her.
You do not fear me. Lyra shook her head slightly, her silver eyes glinting.
Fear is not always visible. Sometimes it is hidden, waiting for the right moment to act. And sometimes it is a guide.
The tension between them was almost unbearable. Neither moved, yet the air seemed to crackle with anticipation.
Something unspoken passed between them. An understanding of power, of restraint, of the possibility of a bond that neither fully comprehended. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the garden, stirring the fountains and bending the hedges. Lyra's hair lifted slightly, and for a brief instant her glow intensified, silver light spilling around her like a halo.
Kale stepped back, startled though he did not admit it.
Something ancient, something powerful had stirred in her presence.
And then, as if on cue, a shadow flitted across the outer walls of the garden.
A silent observer hidden in darkness watched Lyra closely. Their lips moved in a whisper. The moon awakens.
The Alpha does not yet understand the danger he faces. Kale felt a chill run down his spine. He did not know who had spoken, or even if it was mortal, but the warning unsettled him. He had faced armies, traitors, and assassins, yet none had made him feel this fragile.
Standing in the moonlight, remained calm, serene, almost untouchable. And yet he sensed that her calm carried power beyond mortal reckoning. For the first time, Kale wondered if he had met someone he could not control, someone who might challenge not just his authority, but the very essence of his being. Lyra turned toward the castle, her steps light.
I should return, she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the excitement or fear that surged within her. The night grows late, and the shadows are not always kind. Kael watched her retreat, the silver glow fading as she moved away.
He wanted to call her back, to demand answers, but he knew that some truths could not be forced. Some powers revealed themselves only in their own time. And as she disappeared into the castle's corridors, the wind whispered again through the trees, carrying the promise of change, of trials, and of a bond that was only beginning to form.
The court may have believed the night's events were a simple confrontation between king and servant, but Kale knew better. Something ancient had awakened, something that could not be ignored, and he was caught in its pull, whether he wished to be or not.
The moon shone brighter, and for a moment Kale could swear he saw its light reflected in her eyes, a light that was calm, eternal, and impossibly powerful. The first step had been taken. The threads of fate were moving, winding together in ways neither Kale nor Lyra could yet comprehend. And somewhere, beyond the walls of the castle, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the right moment to act. The stage was set. The king and the moon were bound together, whether by choice, by destiny, or by something far older than either of them. And in that quiet tension, in the moonlit garden, a storm was waiting to break. The castle awoke to a quiet unease. Birds avoided the towers, and even the wind seemed hesitant to stir the banners that fluttered above the walls. The banquet, once the grandest display of power, was already fading into memory, replaced by whispers of the moon waitress and her silent power. Lyra moved through the halls with her usual grace, yet the weight of attention was heavier than ever. Eyes followed her, curious, fearful, or calculating.
Kale, too, felt the shift. The tension that had begun in the banquet hall now clung to every corner of the castle.
He had tried to bury his fascination, to remind himself that she was a servant, a mortal girl. But something in him resisted. Desperation, something that long experience had never prepared him for. He found himself seeking her presence, not commandingly, but involuntarily. She had become a problem he could not solve, a mystery he did not wish to fully untangle, yet could not ignore. It was during the late hours of the night that Cale first realized how dangerous this could become. From his private chambers he had seen her walk through the castle gardens under the silver light of the moon. There was no fear in her movements, only a quiet certainty. The faint shimmer of light that danced around her hands, so subtle that most mortals would not notice, made Cale pause. His pulse quickened in a way that anger, fear, or desire alone could not explain. Desperation. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the darkened wall of the outer garden. A figure moved silently, observing Lyra. Desperation. Cale felt the presence immediately, though he could not see it clearly. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. Desperation. Assassins, spies, and traitors had long sought his life, but this felt different. Dark energy, something old and unnatural, moved in the shadows. Desperation. And it was drawn to Lyra. Lyra sensed it too. Breath. Her steps slowed, her eyes narrowing as a subtle silver glow flared faintly along her skin. The wind whispered around her, carrying voices she could not fully comprehend. She knew, without thinking, that danger was near, and that it would require every ounce of her skill and caution to survive. Cale left his chambers silently, moving faster than the guards he passed could perceive. Barash. He arrived just as Lyra turned to face the darkness. His hand reached for hers, instinctively protective.
"Stay behind me," he said quietly, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Lyra shook her head, her silver eyes glinting.
Bears. No, Cale. I can feel it. Berate. You must see this. A low, murmuring sound came from the shadows, like wind through stone. Desperation. Then the figure stepped forward, and Cale caught the faint shimmer of a dagger in its hand. Not ordinary steel. It glowed with a dark, unnatural light. Lyra stepped forward as well, her presence emanating calm. She raised her hands, and the faint glow around her intensified, spilling like liquid moonlight over the cobblestones. The figure hesitated, then lunged. In a motion faster than Cale could follow, Lyra's light flared, creating a shield that forced the assailant back. A faint hum filled the air, and Cale felt the ground beneath him vibrate with hidden power. The figure staggered, then vanished into a dark mist that seemed almost alive. Cale exhaled slowly, still staring at her. Wait. What are you?
Lyra's gaze softened, but her stance remained ready. I am the moon, Cale.
At least part of it. I carry its power, its cycles, its light.
It is quiet, yet it can be strong, and tonight it has warned us. Cale's mind reeled. He had faced traitors, witches, and armies, but never anything like this. Desperation. The realization hit him. She was no ordinary servant, no ordinary mortal. She was a force that could alter the very balance of his kingdom. Desperation. And yet, he could not look away.
"We must prepare," Lyra continued, her voice calm but firm. "Enemies will come, drawn to the light I carry."
Some will seek to use it. Some will seek to destroy it.
And some will try to claim it as their own. desperation. His pride, which had always demanded absolute control, now wrestled with caution. He had never needed to depend on another, yet he knew instinctively that this battle, whatever it might become, would require trust, cooperation, and restraint. The thought unsettled him more than any threat he had ever faced. The following days were tense. Desperation. Cale summoned his most trusted advisors, yet kept the true danger and Lyra's involvement secret. He began to observe her in ways he had never observed another human being. Desperation. She moved among the servants and courtiers with subtle grace, her eyes alert to every shadow, every whisper. Her calm presence contrasted with the chaos brewing in the court, and Cale found himself drawn to it as much as he feared it. Desperation. Lyra, meanwhile, honed her abilities in secret. She spent nights in the hidden chambers beneath the castle, practicing the flow of moonlight through her hands, testing its boundaries. She understood that each use of her power drew attention, however faint, and that she could not afford mistakes. The kingdom, the man who had intrigued her beyond words, and her own hidden destiny all depended on her restraint and skill. Desperation. One evening as Cale walked the corridors alone, he heard her voice, soft yet certain, echoing from the shadowed hallway. "The chains of shadow are tightening," she said, almost to herself. Desperation. "And soon they will demand a choice."
Cale paused. "Lyra," he called softly, stepping closer.
Desperation. She turned, her silver eyes reflecting the torchlight, calm yet resolute. "You should not be here," she said. Her voice measured. "The shadows are not yet ready to show themselves fully. It is safer in the chambers below." Cale frowned.
Safer? I have faced death countless times. I am not afraid. Lyra's gaze softened briefly, but her hands remained steady.
Desperation.
This is not fear of death, Cale. This is the understanding that some dangers cannot be fought with steel alone.
Some require patience, wisdom, and unity.
Brute. He studied her, realizing that for the first time someone had spoken words that pierced the armor of his pride. He felt something shift inside him, a desire not to command, but to learn.
And yet he struggled with the loss of control he had never known he could feel. Days turned into weeks. The tension in the court grew. Rumors of a hidden power spread among the servants, whispered tales of a girl who glowed under moonlight, who could repel shadows and sense danger before it arrived.
Courtiers speculated, some out of fear, some out of greed, about who she was and what she might bring to the kingdom. Cale, ever vigilant, continued to study her, testing boundaries, seeking answers without fully revealing his own uncertainty.
Their encounters became a careful dance, a silent negotiation of power, respect, and unspoken attraction. Cale was learning restraint. Lyra was learning trust. Each small moment, each glance or word, deepened a bond neither dared name aloud.
One night, the castle was plunged into darkness.
Torches went out, and the air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding. Shadows seemed to stretch and move on their own, and an unnatural chill swept through the halls. Lyra sensed it immediately, the threads of her power responding to the rising danger. She moved swiftly, her footsteps silent but precise. Cale found her in the grand hall, her hands raised slightly, silver light spilling from her fingers like a river of moonlight. The shadows writhed and twisted, coalescing into forms that were almost human, yet far darker, far older than anything mortal.
They circled her, whispering in tongues older than the castle itself.
Cal drew his sword, yet even as he did, he realized it would be useless. The shadows did not fear steel. They responded only to light, to presence, to the quiet authority that Lyra wielded without effort. "Kale," she said, her voice firm yet calm. "Inspiration. Back. You cannot fight this with force. Only with trust, in me, and in the light I carry." Kyle hesitated, pride warring with instinct, then nodded. He took a step back, his eyes never leaving her. The shadows surged forward, and Lyra's hands glowed brighter. Light radiated from her, washing over the dark forms, bending them, slowing them, forcing them to retreat into corners of the hall where they could harm nothing. The display was brief but powerful. Kale watched in awe and unease. He realized with sudden clarity that she was more than mortal. She was a force that demanded respect, patience, and trust, and he understood that their fates were now intertwined, not by choice alone, but by the threads of destiny itself. When the shadows finally withdrew, Lyra lowered her hands, the glow fading to a gentle shimmer. She looked at Kael, her gaze steady. "This was only a warning," she said softly. "The real test will come soon." And when it does, we must be ready. Kael's jaw tightened, and he realized that he was not merely protector or king in this moment. He was a student of something far older, far stronger than himself. And he was both terrified and captivated. For the first time in his life, Kael felt that his pride, his power, and his certainty were not enough. He needed something more: guidance, partnership, and perhaps love. And somewhere, deep within the castle walls, unseen eyes observed them. A whisper carried through the corridors. "The moon rises, and the Alpha must bend, or all will be lost." The castle was draped in shadow, pierced only by the silver light of the full moon. Night had fallen early, heavy clouds drifting across the sky, casting fleeting darkness over the towers and courtyards. The air was thick with anticipation and unease. Courtiers whispered anxiously about the moon waitress and the king whose restraint had begun to falter. Some feared the power she carried. Some desired it, and some, more sinister, plotted to use it. Lyra stood in the highest tower, her hands raised toward the sky. Moonlight spilled over her, reflecting in her eyes, turning them into mirrors of silver flame. The moon itself seemed to answer her call, bathing the stones in soft, radiant light. Her heart beat in rhythm with the cycles she had carried for centuries, the quiet strength that had been honed through years of patience and observation finally awakening fully. Kael approached silently, his cloak brushing the stone floor. He had faced armies, traitors, and sorcery, but the feeling he had now, standing beside her, was unlike any battle he had ever known. The weight of responsibility, the pull of destiny, and the stirring of something deep within him converged in a tension that made his chest tighten.
"Lyra," he said softly, not as a king commanding a subject, but as a man speaking to someone he trusted more than he had ever trusted another soul. "Are you ready?"
"I am ready," she said. "But so much depends on you, Kyle. Your pride, your control, they will be tested as much as mine." Kael swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. He had ruled with strength and fear for decades, and yet here he was being asked to surrender not to a person, but to a force far older than the throne itself. He clenched his fists, letting his determination rise to meet the challenge. "I will not fail," he said. The castle trembled, not with earthquakes, but with the gathering of power. Dark forces that had lingered at the edges of the kingdom, drawn by Lyra's awakening, began to move. Shadows rose from the walls, from the forests beyond, and from places unseen carrying the chill of ancient malice. The air hummed with energy, as if the night itself held its breath.
Lyra raised her hands higher, channeling her power with precision.
Bray, moonlight pooled around her feet, radiated from her palms and arced outward in ripples of silver energy. She had learned restraint, patience, and focus, but now she allowed her power to flow freely, bending light to her will, guiding it as both shield and sword. Kale stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. The warmth of his presence grounded her, and she realized that the strength of their bond, trust, understanding, and respect, was as crucial as her own celestial power. Breath.
Together, she said quietly. Together, Kale echoed.
The shadows surged. They were not mindless. They were clever, adapting, seeking weaknesses in the castle walls and in the defenses of those within. Lyra's light collided with the darkness, pushing back forms that writhed and hissed, shapes with teeth like iron and eyes like coals. Kale fought alongside her not with sword alone but with strategy and instinct, guiding her to positions where her light would be most effective.
"You are incredible," Kale said between movements, awe and admiration in his voice. "I have never seen anything like this." Lyra shook her head, a faint smile curving her lips.
"It is not just me. You give me strength too."
Inspiration. "Do not forget that, Kale." The night stretched into a tense battle of wills.
Inspiration. Shadows lashed and recoiled. Lyra's silver light grew brighter, responding to her emotion, her courage, and her bond with Kale. Inspiration.
The castle itself seemed to respond, ancient stones resonating with energy as if acknowledging her role. At the peak of the struggle, Lyra raised her hands toward the moon.
Inspiration. She channeled all her power into a single radiant beam of light that cut through the shadows, casting a silver glow that stretched across the courtyard and up into the clouds. The darkness shrieked and recoiled, unable to resist the force of pure, controlled celestial energy. Kale stood beside her, offering protection, support, and strength. He realized that his pride, which had always demanded obedience and control, was not a weakness, but a choice to be tempered. He had learned in the shadow of her light that true power was shared, not imposed. When the shadows finally dissipated, the courtyard was bathed in the calm radiance of moonlight. The threat had passed for now, but the lessons remained. Kale looked at Lyra, his face softened in a way it had never been before.
You are more than I could have imagined," he said quietly. Lyra's eyes glimmered, touched by both exhaustion and quiet triumph.
And you are more than I expected, Kale. You have learned to bend without breaking.
To trust without fear. That is why we prevailed.
Inspiration. The castle was silent but alive, holding the echoes of the night's events. Courtiers peeked cautiously from the shadows, sensing a shift. Inspiration. The king had changed, the moon had revealed herself, and the balance of power had transformed not through violence alone, but through understanding, restraint, and unity. Days later, Kale stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. Inspiration. The morning sun was pale, but the memory of moonlight lingered in the stones and the air. Lyra joined him, standing beside him quietly. Inspiration.
She was no longer merely the servant who would carry trays of food. She was a force of light, a protector, a partner in the governance and defense of the realm.
"You've changed," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with the cool morning air. Kale's gaze lingered on the horizon, then returned to her. "No, I have remembered," he said, breaths. "I had forgotten that strength is not just in fear or in command. It is in connection, inspiration, in trust, in choosing to act when it matters most. Inspiration.
her silver eyes catching the first rays of sunlight. And I've learned that even the moon must sometimes rely on others. That light alone is not enough. It must be guided, shared, and protected. For a moment they simply stood together, two souls intertwined by fate, power, and understanding. The kingdom below them stretched in quiet beauty, yet they both knew the world was far from safe. Forces older than either of them still stirred beyond the mountains, beyond the forests, beyond the walls of the castle. But they also knew that together they could face whatever came. Kale turned toward Lyra.
Will you remain with me? He asked. Not as a king commanding a subject, but as a man seeking partnership, trust, and unity.
Bration. Lyra's silver eyes softened. As long as the moon rises, Kale. And as long as you walk beside it. They clasped hands, a simple gesture that held the weight of destiny. It was not just a promise of protection or alliance, but of understanding, respect, and mutual strength. They had faced shadows, ancient power, and fear. And now, together, they faced a future that would be brighter because it was shared. The court, witnessing from the hallways and towers, whispered once more. But this time the whispers were not of fear, nor of intrigue. They spoke of a king transformed, a moon revealed, and a bond that could withstand both darkness and time. Night returned again, as it always does, and the moon hung low in the sky, its light bathing the castle in silver. Lyra stood at the edge of the balcony, feeling the pull of her celestial heritage. The light around her flared briefly, not in warning but in acknowledgement. The moon had awakened fully. And the king, standing beside her, had learned to follow its guidance rather than oppose it. A soft wind carried whispers across the towers, echoes of prophecy and destiny. The moon has awakened, it said, and the Alpha has learned the true meaning of strength. We are ready, he said, his voice steady. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Lyra's gaze lifted toward the moon. Together, she agreed.
And in that moment the castle, the kingdom, and the world seemed to hold its breath.
A new dawn was approaching, a dawn born not of conquest or fear, but of trust, understanding, and the quiet brilliance of light shared between two souls. Though challenges would come, and shadows would rise again, Kale and Lyra had discovered a truth older than the throne or the crown. True power is not wielded alone, and destiny is most potent when hearts are aligned. The moon shone brightly, and its reflection danced on the walls of the castle. Lyra and Kale stood side by side, the Alpha and the moon bound by fate, transformed by trials, and ready to meet the future as equals, guardians of both the kingdom and each other. And so, a legend was born, a king who learned to bend without breaking, a moon that revealed its light in the darkness, and a bond that could withstand both time and shadow. The night was calm, but the memory of the battle remained, a reminder that power and trust, light and shadow, pride and humility were forever intertwined. And somewhere, far beyond mortal reach, the stars watched, waiting for the next chapter of the moon and the Alpha King.